This is not, okay, what doctors would recommend. This is not the healthiest diet. However, obviously, President Trump seems to have boundless energy. So what does your reporting suggest?
We see him go up and down during the course of a day, and it may sometimes depend on the supply of Diet Coke.
What the hell is happening in the news? This is Today in Media. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Monday. That means it's time for Today in Media, and that's when Amber and I break down the 5 most foolish takes that we've seen out there. We're going to start off with the president went off on a little tweet storm this weekend against Dave Weigel of the Washington Post, who actually has a very storied history here with the caller. So, Amber, if you want to jump into that.
Yeah, so Dave Weigel tweeted out, I don't know as much about his history with the caller, but he tweeted out a picture of Trump's rally in Pensacola, Florida, except he tweeted out a picture that was taken well before the vast majority of attendees were allowed into the event. So the arena looked empty, but in reality, when the event actually happened, it was, as Trump said, packed to the rafters.
Yeah, so to give a little bit of background here, Weigel was actually fired in 2010 after a Daily Caller story exposing journalist. So he still has a special hatred in his heart for this institution and for the foundation. But that's okay, because, Dave, we're here to cover the fact that you are always a snarky Twitter personality, and you are constantly trying to undermine the president and put tweets out there. This is just very classic of many of the people who cover politics nationally today. And, he got called out by the president. I don't know if it's necessarily appropriate or what Trump should probably be spending his time on, but that's what we have. Yeah. But we'll move on. We'll go to CNN. Basically what happened is that this morning there was a tragic terrorist attack in Manhattan on the Port Authority bus station in the subway. And while that was occurring, CNN decided that it should cover this instead.
This is not, okay, what doctors would recommend. This is not the healthiest diet. However, obviously, President Trump seems to have boundless energy. So what does your reporting suggest?
Well, some of that energy is obviously caffeine. And we see him go up and down during the course of a day and during the course of a week, and it may sometimes depend on the supply of Diet Coke. The thing that would concern me more is this consistent consumption of fats and sugars and all sorts of stuff that's bad for you. We can get to 65 or 70. The president's now, I guess, 71, and look healthy on the outside, and he does have a lot of energy, but any physician will tell you that that's a recipe for problems. And we need a president who's healthy, who's not going to have an episode that puts him in the hospital. I would look forward to the physical that he's going to have in January for the country to be reassured, or for the president maybe to be put on a different path, as President Clinton got on a different path.
Yeah, so apparently Trump's TV habits and his affinity for Diet Coke is more important than a terrorist attack. And mind you, this was right when the first major details started to come out about the attack. It was when we first learned, how many people were injured, where exactly it happened, who was in custody. And instead, CNN was covering this sort of fluff piece about the president.
It's many of the networks today. It's absolutely disgusting. The number one story in this country should be a man who apparently is an immigrant to this country, who was a former cab driver, radicalized here at home, who tried to blow himself up on the New York City subway. It is unfathomable. If this man had even a cent more training, we would be looking at a total mass casualty event. It's only because he's an idiot that this has occurred. And yeah, it's disgusting. We're talking about Trump's Diet Coke habit, how many hours of TV he watches, the fact that he hate watches CNN, which is really them, stroking their egos. This is why the country hates the media. It's for this exact reason. They want to dunk on the President of the United States while we are under attack. And that puts it exactly how you need. But we're going to move on to David Frum. He is I guess he's a conservative. I don't really know what he does these days. But he writes for The Atlantic, and he had this to say on CNN's reliable sources about why it's actually a good thing that journalism is messing up so much in the age of Trump.
Excluding Fox, the worst mistakes that press organizations have made in the coverage of Trump has precisely occurred in their overzealous effort to be fair to the president.
Wow. So David Frum says the fact that the media is making so many mistakes shows how good they are. Let's
Oh my
let's
gosh,
dissect that.
this is the weirdest reverse logic I think I've ever heard in my life. We're supposed to trust the media because they sell us fake stories.
Right.
CNN has a ridiculous amount of questions to answer about this story they botched, and we're going to talk about that later. But to sit here and apologize for the fact that they spread fake news on their channel for 8 hours is just ridiculous. And to frame it as it's somehow the public's fault for not trusting the media after you just sold them a fake story, I can't even believe that this is something I just watched on TV.
I get where Frum is coming from, because he's saying that if they were truly, utterly fake news, then they would just not admit it whenever they got something so egregiously wrong. But that's kind of what happened here. It took almost 7 hours for CNN to issue a correction. It was deliberately deceived by its sources. It's not outing the people who gave them those fake stories. They only corrected a story and did not retract it, even though that story lost all of its juice once it was properly described. And we're going to get into this later. But the fact is here is that what we should be talking about is prudence, is you don't just immediately jump on the air and report something because somebody is telling you something, regardless of whether you got it double confirmed or something like that, unless you're sure that you're not being deceived. And I don't think that due diligence was done here.
No, and David Frum also said something along the lines of, well, journalism is a process and it's all about the process of finding the truth. Right. But the process is supposed to occur before you publish a story, not afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. But, we're going to keep going on here. We're going to talk about, CNN walking back its story on Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And so it's a little complicated, but we'll take a look at the tape.
A newly released document backs the explanation for why Attorney General Jeff Sessions did not disclose meetings with the Russian ambassador on his security clearance forms. The email shows the FBI told a Sessions aide that Sessions was not required to disclose foreign contacts that happened during the course of his duties as a senator. The newly released email supports the Justice Department's original explanation given last May when CNN first reported the omission of foreign contacts on Sessions' security clearance form.
All right, so the gist of this story is that back in May, CNN reported that AG Jeff Sessions had not reported meetings he had with the Russian ambassador while he was a senator on a security clearance form for him to become Attorney General. They basically touted this as this huge scandal, like Jeff Sessions was trying to hide meetings that he had with the Russians, and it was all wrapped up into this Trump collusion narrative. Now what we know, what CNN quietly reported on this morning, is that he was told not to disclose those meetings by the FBI. So yet again, we have another big Russia bombshell scandal collusion story that turns out to be absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and if you guys will remember, this was major national news at the time.
Wall-to-wall coverage.
Yeah, absolute wall-to-wall coverage, proved collusion, et cetera, et cetera. And again and again and again, the legs of the stool that holds up this narrative keep getting kicked out from under them. And in many cases, by follow-up reporting from these own institutions, which is what makes it even more egregious because they don't go back and properly correct their previous stories or admit that they were utterly and completely wrong without any of the facts that they needed to actually tell a story. But we're going to move on here. We're going to finally end with the absolute, probably the biggest mistake in American journalism, other than the Brian Ross thing, which coincidentally also happened very recently, that we have seen in quite a while. And that was CNN botching the major story about, essentially about an email and WikiLeaks. So Amber, I want you to explain the chronology here of what happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
So back during the campaign, in 2016, there was an email sent to Donald Trump Jr. supposedly from WikiLeaks that was giving him advanced access to the emails and documents that were stolen from the Democrats. What actually happened was that some random person who was not even affiliated with WikiLeaks sent an email to Don Jr. after all of the stolen documents were already made public. basically sending him stuff that was already out on Twitter and in the media.
Yeah, so the fact there, though, is that what they got wrong was the date between September 14 and September 4, which showed that the email had actually come after WikiLeaks had already sent them out, making it really just Don Jr. getting some crank email from some random dude that he didn't open to an email address that he did not even use. Now, they have corrected the story, but does that sound like a story to you? That should be retracted in, completely. It should be shown that this story was utterly and completely false. It has no news relevance whatsoever as it's currently constituted, and it's still sitting up there on that website. The real question here, and this is what a lot of people are asking, is these same sources who got this so desperately wrong that CNN believes it did not try to deceive them, what are they the source of for so many other stories? How many other fake news stories are out there?
And a lot of people have pointed out that these sources likely came from the House Intel Committee, which means it came from congressmen. So the CNN apparently is so blinded by their own biases, so desperate to prove collusion between Trump and Russia, that they're willing to run with a story that came from two anonymous sources who apparently deceived them, and they didn't even think to get a physical copy of the email so they could check it themselves, which, by the way, the Daily Caller did within 30 minutes of questioning CNN's reporting. So clearly they were so desperate to run with this anti-Don Jr. WikiLeaks collusion story that they didn't even think to get physical evidence of what they were reporting on.
There you go. So thank you guys so much for joining us. That is Today in Media. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Sagar Enjeti with my co-host Amber Athey, and we'll be back on Wednesday.